All right, what's up, guys? I want to start the video immediately with an apology for what my voice is probably going to sound like at various points. I'm dealing with a little bit of allergy stuff. Um, I know it's not fun when I clear my throat into the mic. I'm bummed about it too. I'm trying not to do it, just so, but I mean, it's going to happen. So apologies ahead of time. Anyway, what are we looking at today? On CourseDen, which is likely where you are when you're watching this video, there are actually two items for today. There's this video, and right now you're just staring at a blank document on my screen, right? But then there's also, I can actually pull it up for you. I've gone ahead and posted, um, well, I've posted this document to CourseDen so you can have it open as a PDF. I think that would probably be the best course of action for all of you. We're not going to talk about it just yet. I'm going to talk about it here in a couple minutes, but go ahead and get that open if you have not already. You don't have to read it yet. I'm going to have a spot in the video for that as well, but I just want you to have all your materials sort of up and ready to go. Anyway, all right. To begin with, what we've done thus far this semester, we've watched the movie, hopefully, by this point. If you haven't, man, you really should do that. Um, but we've watched the movie, we've done a handful of assignments. And honestly, the way I treat the first couple of weeks of the class, I like to try to just get everybody acclimated. And what I mean by that is, um, we're all coming in with different experiences, both in terms of life, but I'm more talking about in terms of school, sort of where we're at as writers and all this other stuff. And I'm kind of just trying to do two things. One, I'm trying to get a feel for where all you guys are at, because again, it's different for every person, so that's kind of complicated. But then two, I'm trying to, at least a little bit, get everybody on the same page. So that's why, the first couple assignments, there's some nuts and bolts stuff like the quotations thing, but then there's some other stuff that honestly, I kind of just mean to be generative. So the discussion post, the close reading assignment, which of course I'm filming this on Monday, so most of you haven't turned in yet, but both of those especially are really more meant to just get you going. Just here's what I'm thinking. This may or may not even end up in my paper at all, but just trying to sort of open the floodgates, hopefully, of your own thought process and get that ball rolling. Now that we've done that, what I really want to do from here on out, we're going to focus much more on, all right, how do we make any of this stuff? I keep saying stuff. How do we make any of these thoughts, these ideas, into an actual paper? Okay. And so what we're going to focus on today is body paragraphs. I like to start with body paragraphs for two reasons as well. Number one, it's the bulk of your paper, right? Like no matter what paper you're talking about, what kind of length it is, in this case, I believe it's 2 to 3 pages, so not terribly long. It's going to be the bulk of your paper, right? The body of your paper is just your paper. So I start with that. Also, though, actually, I start with it, and I know this runs counter to probably what most of you were taught about papers. I start with it because that's actually where your thoughts begin. What I mean by that is, and again, I have to go back to um, how you guys were all taught in high school, how I was taught in high school way back when. Um, you're taught usually anyway. There's always exceptions, but you're usually taught to write papers according to an in-class essay model. The reason for that is you're being taught the skills you need to pass certain tests. And there's a good reason your high school teachers are doing that because you end up having to take tests to get out of high school. So yeah, that's not for nothing. But when you get to college, we're teaching you, I hate to put it this way, how to write real papers. No one cares about in-class essays after high school. You will, um, it doesn't matter. I mean, you may have it in like a history class here or there, but apart from that, there's no real world application for that skill, unfortunately. So what we're doing is we're approaching papers like real papers, real thoughts, real sort of editorial process. And what that means is you start with the text, like we've done here for a couple weeks now. You focus on specific details that you have ideas about, and you just expound upon that. And if you do that enough, what it's going to turn into, and what we're about to launch into here, is a couple body paragraphs. If you get, for instance, for this paper, 2 or God forbid 3 body paragraphs under your belt, not only, first of all, will you basically have the paper, right, considering the length requirement, but you'll know what the whole paper is about. Only then, honestly, can you sit down to try to write an introduction and a thesis, right? I know all of you have at least some working knowledge of what a thesis is. Among other things, and this is a little preview for next time, so get excited. A thesis is meant to sum up your paper, correct? How are you going to sum up your paper before your paper exists, right? Like that's kind of um, that's one of the most emblematic things about sort of the way you guys were taught to write papers and why it's so completely backward. It makes no sense. So anyway, without further ado, let's talk about body paragraphs. To begin with, I just want to very briefly lay out the sort of format that I was taught, that I use. There's different nomenclature, SAT word, I guess. There's different nomenclature for how this can work, how these things can be built, but they all actually work the same way. They just use different language, okay? What I was taught is a thing called the 3 I's, and they are these. Oop, sorry, can't talk and type. Okay, identify, illustrate, and interpret. The way I like to talk to students about these, if it helps you, because it did me, I mean, it has stuck with me now for, God, when was I in 1101? It's been over a decade. But these words helped me memorize how a body paragraph is meant to be built. If it helps you, if your brain works like that, by all means, write these down, remember them, what have you. But I say all that to say what really matters is what these pertain to, and that is this. Okay. Oh, thanks. All right, so how do these work? Your topic sentence, and again, some of you may be familiar with some of these things, but I'm still going to break them down. Your topic sentence is the main idea of your paragraph, right? You're going to sum up, all your words. I mean, you got all kinds of thoughts, hopefully, in a single body paragraph, but there should be a way to sort of distill those ideas into a single sentence, into a main idea. That goes at the top of every body paragraph. More often than not, I'm stressing this for a reason, more often than not, if you guys forget something in a paper, it's topic sentences. And they matter. Um, Now, they matter to me for different reasons, like in terms of organizing your thoughts, but they should matter to you because they actually factor into your grade somewhat heavily. So I'm telling you right now, if you want to do well, one thing to really focus on is topic sentences, and we're going to spend some time there. The second one, evidence, I would hope that that's fairly obvious. That's actually what we focused on for the most part for the first 2 weeks of class, right? Evidence, specific evidence from your text. Oftentimes, this will be a quotation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, especially, it depends upon what kind of text you're looking at. In this case, we're looking at a movie. Many of you still will quote the film because there's all kinds of quotations in the movie that are great. But there's visual stuff too that you can't quote because it's visual, so you'd have to describe it. But that's still specific, right? It's specific evidence, specific details that you're going to focus on when it comes to making your argument. That's number two. And then number three, the bulk of your grade, the bulk of everything in your paper really depends upon your analysis. And what that is, and that's what we're going to focus on today, building from your evidence, sort of, I've heard other people describe it as explaining your case. Like, I mean, the word evidence, right? It sounds like we're in a court of law. If you present some kind of evidence to a judge or a jury, how are you going to explain not just your ideas, but how that evidence proves those ideas? That's what your analysis is, okay? The other way to think about this, the relationship between these three items, I always recommend starting when you're building these body paragraphs, starting with evidence, working through your analysis, just kind of figuring it out how that works. And if you do that enough, you will arrive at an argument. Then you sum up that argument in a topic sentence. That's how you build these paragraphs. Okay. So what does that mean? Let's look at the document for today. Oh, and apologies. I'm trying to help my throat, so I'm drinking tea. I'm going to move the mic. Don't worry. Okay. Got that one out of the way. Now, this is the spot in the video. I'd like you to pause here and Read over the document. I suppose you could read it here. It's on the screen, but I still think you should have it up separately for reasons that we will cover. Anyway, I'll give you that beat. Go ahead and pause and read it, please. Okay. Hopefully you read it. I always say hopefully. This is a weird setup, right? I'm just praying that you do the things I ask you to do. It feels odd. Anyway, what are we looking at? This is a student's homework that they submitted. And first of all, I always like to say at the beginning of every workshop, I only ever pull workshop pieces because well, I could say that in a different way. All right, I will never just bring something that is straight up trash to your attention. I will never do that. Mostly because that doesn't help anybody. Number one, it's not going to make that person feel good, right? If we just bury them the whole time. But also, I don't think that's terribly educational, to be honest with you, right? Is there stuff here that needs some work? Sure, and we're going to talk about that. But they also have a couple really cool things that they're doing, or like some really great, I think, opportunities that are in this submission, and we're going to pinpoint those as well. So basically, what I'm going to say to you here is, we will start in on items that need to be kind of cleaned up or dealt with in some way. Okay. But then we're going to end on, I think, again, the reason I pulled this, honestly, things that they do that I want you guys to make sure you all do. I'm like, that's really good. We need to make sure we're all aware. Sometimes that you can do that sort of thing. Like some students will say, I didn't know I could do that. Like that's kind of what we're after today. All right. To begin with, and again, sorry, my throat's killing me. Okay. So we're talking about Tristan Harris here. Many of you will talk about him. He's kind of the star of the documentary in a way. I don't mind the context, I suppose. I mean, we say a whole lot about who he is and was, which, well, I can't really say why just yet, but that ends up kind of being important for our evidence, so that's okay. I'm not in love with that verb here. I know you're just trying to like give me a synonym for says, which I appreciate. But that's anyway. Let's break this apart a little bit. What we have here is our evidence. We got our context, and we got a monster of a quotation. That quotation is too long. It's just too long. Now, to be fair, this did not come from a paper. This came from homework, which I always want you guys to be looser in your homework because I think that's how ideas sort of bubble up to the surface. So that's fine. But I just want to make it clear, when it comes to your papers, this quotation is too long. It cannot happen, okay? But what does that mean? Well, first of all, I will say there's some great stuff in this quotation, and we're going to talk about some of that. But we would need to trim. We'd need to cut this guy down. There's two ways to sort of think about how to do that. Number one, you can just go in and look for opportunities in the same ways that we've talked about quotations, namely, what language do you think we could dig into? What language seems significant for one reason or another? You want to make sure you don't lose that stuff, right? And then anything that doesn't fit that bill, for the most part, you can cut, right? The other thing to think about, because we do have analysis down here, well, you could just look at that and go, depending upon whatever I came up with here, what do I need here? Sometimes, oftentimes actually, you'll provide a quotation and then you'll end up talking about it and you kind of find out, I didn't need most of that, right? Like that's how your brain works. It's how all of our brains work. You don't. A famous writer once said, "I don't know what I think until I have written." Right? And it's true. As you write, your head just kind of figures it out as you go, and you go back and look at it and go, "Oh wow, I didn't even realize I felt that way, or I thought that." Right? Like we all do this. So just for a moment, and again, if you need to, you can pause. You can take a second, and I'm trying to get it in a good spot on the screen. Sorry. You look at the quotation. What language stands out? What language? One of the tests that we always like to use If you overheard this on a street corner, would it catch your attention? Or is anything put kind of in an odd way? Anything at all that stands out to you? Go ahead and take a second, and I'll pause here so you can read it. Okay. So again, there's a lot here, and he is making a, I think, somewhat profound point about the difference between tools and what he thinks social media is, which is interesting. So on the one hand, he is, and I think I'm going to make some notes as I kind of talk at you here. One thing he's doing is he's highlighting thanks Google. Um, as we talk about Google, it's anyway. Um, right? Like, isn't he kind of saying, well, that's anyway. Isn't he kind of saying this is what we think this is? This is what we think. These are all tools. What I'm doing right now, this word processor, is a tool, right? And it is. But his point is, it's more than that. There's a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes, and it may not be as sort of innocent or innocuous as we think. That's an important point. All right. But anyway, I worry we have a lot of this quotation because we want to make sure that we get that idea across. One point I want to make to you here is we can just say that, right? We took his big idea and we kind of paraphrased it, and that's fine because we need that space. We want that space for our ideas, our analysis of his rhetoric. Okay. So that said, when it comes to language, what stands out here? He says tool a bunch. I think you'd almost have to talk about not just his use of that term, but perhaps his repetition of it is interesting. You know, you can think about what repetition does to an idea. Um, for instance, might you argue that he really drives the point home that it's not a tool, and maybe he wants the audience to think about why that matters? That's possible, right? I think he says it 3 times, 4 times, 4 times. That's a lot for this. I mean, that's not a very long space to be saying that word over and over again. Um, some of the other language I think that stands out even more, honestly, it's really hard for me. I keep just looking at that is an interesting verb, right? We're talking about social media. We're talking about Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, right? It's seducing you. That is that that is a wild verb. Manipulating is pretty strong too, but seducing, like, again, context is everything. With what we're talking about, that is a wild verb. Yeah. I don't think he's completely off base. Like, I think it applies to what he's talking about. But again, using it here, it's got it's got a lot of heat, if that makes sense. It's got a lot of thought behind it, I think. And again, that might be, that might be, why can't I say it? Oh my God. That might be worth talking about. I don't know why I couldn't make that happen with my mouth. Okay. So those are some options we have. And all that is to say, depending upon what we ended up doing with the quotation, we almost certainly wouldn't want to lose that. It would be hard to talk about the term tool, especially if we focused on the repetition, which I mentioned. It'd be hard to do that and not quote all of this, but there are ways to do it. For instance, an easy one might be like if you were just talking about tool and the repetition, you could cut all this. So keep those first 2 sentences. Um, and then say he goes on to use the term tool several more times, blah, blah, and then you're off and running. Because again, this is his idea when he's saying that thing about tools. And you can kind of paraphrase the fact that he says it more, right? Anyway, why are we doing all this? Well, I didn't want to get too in depth with the quotation before we looked at our students' analysis here. And again, if you need to refresh your memory, go ahead and read real quick, because God knows my throat needs a break. Okay, so what do we have here? Well, there's two things happening. The first one is a bit of a misstep, or I don't even actually know if it's fair to characterize it as a misstep. It's just I want to make sure it kind of reads like I'm not sure if the student knows they're doing this, so I want to be sure of that, right? When we say, and they say mentions again, that might be a thing that they just like to do, so you got to be careful with that, that you don't overdo it. Harris mentions this to allow the world to see how, a quick note, we have said nothing here. And that's a really harsh way to put it, but here's what I mean. Oftentimes when you're writing, and again, we all do this. I'm highlighting this because this is a thing you all do. I do it, okay? I want you to see it. From mentions to media, we don't accomplish anything. And the way I describe this stuff, it's like a speed bump in your brain. The student knew they wanted to talk about Harris and like his ideas or whatever, and they couldn't sort out how to say that for a second, right? It's only a second in your writing. Sorry, my cat is messing with my cables, and Jesus Christ. Anyway, it only takes a second when you're writing this for that to happen, but your fingers keep going, right? And your brain is like, I'm trying to, and then you figure it out. The student wanted to talk about this, but this speed bump is kind of so all that is to say, when it comes to editing, and we'll focus more on this later, but when you're editing, you look for moments like this when you're just not actually saying anything. You could cut almost all this. Harris talks about how media platforms, right? Like, none of that. We need none of that. All right. The other thing, though, the more important thing that's happening here. Sorry, I might have to. I might have to choke a cat. Oh my God. Okay, he fixed it. Sorry. The more important thing that's going on here. Harris does talk about this. And what I mean by that is I worry we might have tricked ourselves into thinking we're accomplishing analysis when all we're doing here is summarizing, right? Now, the other point I want to make though, you can very quickly, and they do keep it brief, you can very quickly sort of sum up a quotation. That's a very common move that people will do. One of the primary reasons is you're kind of signaling to the reader, in this case me, that you know what's going on. I'm fine with that. I just want to make it clear that we haven't actually started analysis yet, right? That's just summarizing what the quotation talks about. All right. But that means the rest of this is our analysis. What do we do here? And what I mean is, and again, this is one of those spots, if you need a second, if you want to pause it and read over this, what argument are we making? And more importantly, what aspect of our evidence are we focused on? So take a second, look at that. I'll give you a beat. If you went back to the quotation now, and I'm gonna try to get it all on screen for you. Okay. If you went back to the quotation, to the evidence, what aspect of that are we putting a finger on and saying, look, you got to look at this because this is what I'm talking about? To be hyper specific, nothing from the quotation really, right? What are we focused on? We keep coming back to it. I see the word itself at least twice in her analysis here. We're talking about the creators. We end up, and this is what I meant earlier by you don't really know what you're going to say or what you think until you get in there. Sorry. We end up focused on the people themselves who are doing the talking. So in this case, Tristan, and all those other guys. That one guy, I worry because when they introduce themselves, it goes kind of quick. But there's the one dude who like runs Etsy, I think he said, which some of you may be like, I don't know, some website, whatever. But He was the head of monetization for Facebook. He's the guy that they brought in and said, figure out how Facebook is going to make money. That's bananas. That is a wild person to be. Okay. And he's just one of the people that they talk to, right? So that is to say, and I'm not recommending to do this, but I'm doing it to make a point. What they end up focusing on, at least for right now, you could honestly do this and just talk about it, right? Now, granted, given what they say, especially because they say creators, you might be better off talking about Tristan, maybe for a sentence, and then maybe bringing up the Etsy guy and hit like what. But again, what aspect are we focused on? We don't even really talk about it here. We just point to it. It's not just the fact that the people that are talking in this documentary are the creators. It's that they're experts. It's that they're foundational in the field, right? Why does that matter? We end up really, again, mostly summarizing what these people are saying. We're not digging into the analysis. Why does it matter that they're experts? Why does it matter that they made the things that they're now trying to warn us about? How does that help them make an argument? How does that shape their argument? Well, I think one of the most available ideas, and again, I'm just going to make notes kind of underneath here. Right? Isn't that kind of the crux of their inclusion in the documentary? Who would know better than these people? They made these things. They made them. And they say at various points that they didn't intend for it to get like this. Several of them, I think, say something about being optimistic or naive. Fine. But now they're saying at the end of it, they're kind of looking back and going, oh, this is not great. Yeah. So who would know better than these people to expand upon that a little bit, right? Like, did I spell that right? Okay. The filmmakers. And that's what we're coming to. This particular line of argument, I think, is all about credibility. Who would be more credible, you know, than the people that made this stuff? Um, that is to say, there's all kinds of people they could talk to. And they do branch out a little bit. They talk to some professors. They talk to a guy that invests in this stuff. So that's kind of interesting too. That they actually branch. That'd be a different but related point, that they don't just stick to the creators. But in this particular paragraph that we're sort of trying to build, we're focused on the creators. That's all about credibility, right? Uh, and again, once you make that point, then you got to explain it. We can dive into it further. And sorry, I got to do this one more time. I'm trying to not, but man, it hurts. This may feel like a silly question, but occasionally you have to break down silly questions. Why? What makes the creators of these technologies credible? Like, what makes their opinion valuable, I guess? You know what I mean? That seems obvious because well, they made it. So, but you got to try your best to explain that thought process. That's what analysis is, or at least where it starts. To me, I'm trying to think myself of how to put it into words. It's like, hmm, That's the beginning of our analysis, right? Now we're explaining what makes their argument credible is because they lived this stuff. They made the stuff they're talking about. So their opinion matters, basically. Okay? And you could go further. And again, sorry for me to talk in type, sorry. They know what they're talking about because they lived it, because they made it. Um, Something like that. Like that's the idea that we're after. And I try to sum it up here. I mean, again, I think we could expound more. Not least of which, again, because and I just controlled X'd it, by the way, because I didn't want to lose it. We don't talk about this quotation yet. We could. We absolutely could. So, for instance, what you might do, and let me clean some of this up now. Oh well, that didn't. I hit the wrong button. So what if, again, this is our evidence that we need to trim. This is our sort of beginning of our analysis. We could probably trim this to some, because this ends up being summary. All right, I took what they were trying to talk about, and instead of summarizing, I started some analysis, okay? So we still need to trim the quotation and try to keep something from it because we're going to talk more about it. But let's look at what we have now. We are interested in number one, just the creators themselves before we even get to this quotation about tools. Okay. So how do we transition to what I think is a related idea? Moreover, right. Oh, can't believe I did that. I feel dumb. Okay, which again, we're built by these people. And now we're talking about tools. Excellent. Well, let's just go ahead and do, man, I would hate to lose that. So let's at least cut this stuff, okay? Cut that period, you don't need that. All right, so we've trimmed that quotation, probably more than half of it. We got the tools stuff, which I think is some of the more valuable language, some of the more significant language, and we've left ourselves with the option to talk about this and or this, because that's really strong too, okay? These aforementioned tools, which again were built by these people, sorry, I'm getting a little fancy there with a synonym for tools. Harris repeatedly makes the point that what? And again, we got to kind of sum up his thought here. If you remember, or you could go back in the video, or hey, check your notes. You should be taking notes. What's the difference he's highlighting between what tools are and what he thinks all these technologies are? Tools are inert, right? It's a dead thing. It's an implement. It's made for our use. That's it. His point is these technologies don't depend upon us to for them to have a use, I guess, or rather, that's not said right. They're using us, really, is what he's kind of saying. It's manipulating you. It wants things from you when a tool is the opposite of that, right? So, who's the tool in that situation? It's us. Ugh. Okay. Harris repeatedly makes the point that um, Makes the point that these technologies use their users by repeating, because now again I'm trying to focus on a detail. It's not just that he's saying tool, but he's repeating it. By repeating the term tool, I think I said point maybe twice already. He works to I don't know. He works to drive this argument home, right? And well, I guess I'll put it to you this way, and I'll hit it one more time. I'll try to make this the last one. He works to drive this argument home. That's fine. What's the effect of not just saying tool, not just repeating it, okay? But now we've kind of started to make the point that he's saying we're the tools in this situation. He's saying we think these technologies are tools for us to use when in fact it's the inverse of that. We're the tools that are being used by this technology. What's the effect of that? What does that do to an audience when you kind of look out and say, you know, you're being manipulated, you're being seduced, to quote him, you're being made to do things without you realizing it? I mean, if we think of language, it's startling. It's, I would assume, upsetting, perhaps, or troubling. You know, let's start there. If we're talking about rhetorical analysis, you got to start again with how it affects an audience. Okay, it's startling, sure. And again, the big question always with analysis is, so what? Why does this matter? And within the confines of this paper, again, how does the fact that Tristan, not just that he says this idea, but that we're arguing, says it in a startling way, in a troubling way, what's the effect of that, of presenting it like that? Well, and again, there's usually multiple answers here. One idea would be, I mean, shouldn't it be just a troubling idea all on its own? So could we argue that by him posing it in a troubling way, he underscores the fact that we should be troubled? Does that make sense? Here, so this is starting to say the least, but it seems clear. Only serves to underscore, I can't say troubling again, I can't say startling. His rhetoric only serves to underscore, I don't know. I'm not totally in love with how that ended, but look, I'm having real trouble with the ends of words for some reason. But look, what have we done? Our start is the same. That's our context, and it's fine. It's pretty good, actually. We ended up trimming our quotation. Just while we're keeping score, we cut, I think, a little over half of it because it was way too long. But also, I mean, if you go back to what we had originally, we really weren't using the quotation at all. But I kept it because what we ended up talking about, okay, through here is great. But I didn't want to lose the whole quotation because the quotation was really good too once we trimmed it. And, you know, bonus points, it actually, I think, tied in really nicely to what we were talking about. So what that means is, if I were talking to the student one-on-one, what I would say is, again, they gave us a great quotation with some good context, too much quotation, but a good quotation. They had thoughts about it, which is excellent. The worst place to be is you have no ideas, right? I would tell you to start over at that point. But they had some ideas. Cool. What do we do with that? Well, we make sure we're not summarizing. You can start with a little bit of summary. I'll give you a sentence. And they did that. After that, though, you got to move to analysis, in this case, rhetorical analysis. So, not just what argument are they making, which is what this is, okay, but how are they making it, and how does the presentation of that argument shape the argument? So, I moved us to here. This is rhetorical analysis, okay? To be perfectly frank with you, I'm not a huge fan of asking questions in a paper, but if you do it, it can't be a rhetorical question. You need to answer it, and that's what we did. Okay? Now, what did we do after that? Well, we still had that quotation left, had some cool stuff going on, and by the way, I still haven't talked about seducing, manipulating. Frankly, I don't know that we had room in this paragraph. So we might end up cutting that little bit. Maybe we use it in another paragraph. Yeah, to be perfectly honest with you, considering what we said, we don't need it here. Okay. And look, for those of you who are a little scared because we keep cutting, I want to show you something. Look at this guy. It's at the top of the page. That's a decent little body paragraph, yeah? Yeah. I'll make it single space so we can see it again. And look, the only way we got there was by digging into details. You're going to hear me say this a lot because you guys, some of you are going to fight me on this. You got to focus on details. Everything in your lives, from what I've heard from students for years, you've been taught to think about things in very vague, very general terms. We are not doing that. You have to focus on details. And they have, this student has good instincts. They focused on the creators to begin with. That's a very specific detail. That's excellent. I just gave them one more detail to think about. In this case, I went with tools, the repetition of it, and because it's kind of tied directly to the idea that these creators are talking about. Great. Body paragraph, mostly. If they want to talk about seducing or manipulating, I think they could do that in a separate body paragraph. So they got that ready to go. To cap all this off, one more thing I want to talk about, then I'll end the video for you. We have our evidence, and for the most part, because you could always expand on it a bit, we have our analysis. We got one thing left. That's the topic sentence. If you go back to how we talked about it, I'm going to highlight everything we're looking at here. Our topic sentence would need to somehow sum this stuff up in a single sentence. And by this stuff, I always want you focused on your argument. You got to sum up your argument in a single sentence. So the first sentence in that highlighted section, that's not our argument. That's Harris's argument, right? Okay. So we could actually, just to make it a little easier, cut that. All this stuff, this is our analysis. We kind of end up focusing on two aspects. The fact that these creators, which I think is the perfect language, right? Because that's who we're talking about here. The people that made this stuff. And the kind of focus on tools. What is a tool? What isn't? Why that matters? What it means if we're the tool all of a sudden. Okay. Those are the two balls that we kind of got in the air, and we're trying to figure out how to make that into a sentence, how to make that work. When it comes to rhetoric, we're talking about credibility, that's kind of the first half, and troubledness. I don't think that's a word, but you get it. That's kind of what we're after when it comes to our argument. So let's just take a swing. Man, I'm struggling today. All right, so by focusing upon the creators of these technologies, that's kind of one of the big pillars we have, right? That's something the documentary does. So that's not our argument yet. But by focusing upon the creators of these technologies, the film, I don't want to say troubling nature again, just because we say that at the end. Disturbing. Ooh, that's good. Is that the best sentence I've ever written? No. Is it okay? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So what did we do? Again, we started with one big thing that we're pointing at from the film. Um, again, this is not an argument yet. This is something that does happen in the movie. They do focus upon the creators of these technologies. Cool. The rest of this sentence is our argument. They bolster their credibility, number one, and then they use that credibility to talk more about how disturbing this stuff is. Awesome. That's a topic sentence. That's exactly what we end up talking about in this body paragraph. Then we got our evidence here. Then the bulk of our writing, and I want to just highlight it for you. The bulk of our writing is analysis. Look at that. Topic sentence, evidence, so much more of this is our analysis. This is where your grade is won and lost. You want to spend most of your time in analysis. That means avoiding summary 95% of the time, and that means digging into not what is said, again, but why it's said in the way that it is. What that does to the audience, um, sometimes it's bolstering credibility, sometimes it's startling you or surprising you or making you think or any of these, right? This is what we're after. Every body paragraph you want to try to build like this. And again, for this paper, you do that 2 or 3 times, all of a sudden, you're damn near done with the assignment, right? So this is the work I'd like you to strive for. When it comes to next time, there's a thesis handout on Courseden I want you to look at because we're going to talk about introductions next time. And of course, for homework, you have a body paragraph due, which is why we did this. So yeah, take your best shot at one of these, just one. Build it as best you can. I'm telling you, start with your evidence. Focus on details, build out your analysis, and only after that, when you really pursue it at length, can you then attempt a topic sentence. But if you do that, it's probably going to go relatively well. Other than that, I hope everyone's well. I'm going to go drink some more tea. I'll catch you later. Thanks.